when you see evidence that looks something like your kids got a hold of a hole punch and started punching holes in your hostas or your roses, and you think, what in the world? Kids, give me my hole punch back. You have leafcutter bees. And they're actually not going to destroy your plant. I mean, you'll have some holy plants. The holes are a little bit bigger than this, I think, usually. Maybe not quite so even. But those leafcutter bees, even though they're going to put a few holes in those beautiful hostas or roses, are really great to have around because they are a native bee. And they are, or most of them are native bees. There are some non-native leafcutter bees, but they are great pollinators and they are great insects to have in your yard, in your garden. Hi, I'm Amy Landers with Gardens That Matter, where we help families create beautiful, bountiful gardens together. And today we are wrapping up our 2-week series on pollinators. We have had so much fun. I've really enjoyed getting to talk about lots of different pollinators. If you want to check out our series, there's a playlist over on our video page and you can check that out. And if you want to invite more pollinators into your yard, we are doing a workshop tonight, June 9th. And it's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern. There's a link in the description. You can sign up. It is a free online workshop. We are going to go in depth about creating your own pollinator paradise. I'm really excited. I've been working on the presentation and kind of polishing up kind of the order and how we're going to talk about everything. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to get to talk about how to really invite all of these amazing creatures like our leafcutter bee into your yard. So let's talk more about this pair. All right, so we are going to talk about a leafcutter bee, and do you know what this is? Hey, Chris! Pollinators! Yay, yay, yay! Do you know this flower? It's a little bit hard to recognize maybe because it's closed up, but in the mornings they're nice and open. Let's see if I can kind of pull it up and you can see. So normally it would look more like this. It would grow on a vine on the ground, or maybe scrambling over something or out of your compost pile. This one is actually a volunteer from our compost pile. This is a squash blossom, or maybe a pumpkin. This one I think might be a pumpkin. But in any case, these native bees are totally at work in our gardens. So they are going to benefit things like our squashes. So we'll talk more about squashes and the other plants that these bees help in a minute, but let's talk more about this bee. A leafcutter bee is one of our native bees, and we have so many native bees. Do you have a guess for how many native bees there are in North America? Put it in the comments if you're up for it. Even if you're watching this recording later, you can put it in the comments to test yourself. I always love to come back and see the comments, so even if you're watching this recording later, the link will actually I'll still take you to more information about pollinators, and the comments are a great place for you to tell me your guess, in this case, of the number of pollinators and just about your garden and what you're seeing. I love to hear about that. All right, how many native bees? Oh, 1,000. Good guess, Chris. It is like a blow your mind number. It's 4,000. 4,000 different species of native bees that we know of. There's probably bees that we don't know of or we haven't identified yet in the U.S. Now, across the U.S., we're going to have different amounts of diversity. Yeah, yes, isn't that amazing? So in the West, you are very fortunate because you're going to have a lot of bee diversity. So the deserts of the Southwest, and then the West, just as a region, has more diversity of bees. I heard one bee researcher talking about how there are more species of bees in the state of Utah than in the whole eastern United States. What? That's amazing to me. But there's still a bunch of bees in the eastern United States too, hundreds and hundreds of bees. So this leafcutter, there's several different species within this group. And I'm going to show you a picture from my old insects encyclopedia here. But you can see, there it is, cutting out that piece of leaf, and then it's carrying it to its nest. Why in the world is it punching holes in our leaves? This is its nesting material. So leafcutter bees are a solitary bee. They don't live in a hive, in a colony. They live, they're solitary. So the females would mate with the male, and then they're going to find a place to put their eggs. So what they're looking for is maybe an old beetle burrow or a place where a woodpecker has pecked into a tree. They might be looking for a bee block. If you put up a bee block, there's like a certain size, I think it's 3/16 of an inch, that's like a good size for leafcutter bees. They would maybe just look for holes that are left over from other like burrowing bees, like a carpenter bee. They might be able to use a carpenter bee, an abandoned burrow from some other insect is what they're looking for. Then they are going to create little larval cases. So they're going to take a leaf and they're going to use it basically as wallpaper for their little baby. And so they're going to lay an egg in there, and then they're also going to go collect pollen, because pollen is baby bee food. It's protein packed. So they're going to go, and they have hairs all over their abdomen. So I'm going to show you up close. Sorry, I'm going to lift you up for just a second. So this is a bee poster that has a ton of native bees on it. And this is just, of course, a sampling of about 4,000 different species. But let's see if I can make it a little lighter for you. Our native bee, that's a leafcutter bee, is going to be right here. And so you can see it's these are bumblebees. Here's a carpenter bee. So it's a fairly medium-sized bee, not as small as like a sweat bee. But this leafcutter bee, similar size to a honeybee. They're going to take all these little hairs underneath. Let's see if I can get you a little closer and keep it in focus. All those little hairs are branched hairs. So think of them like little, like a stick, right? Like tons of little branches off of the hair, tiny. But pollen grains are tiny, and they're like the perfect size to carry pollen grains. So all of those branched hairs on their abdomen, they're going to go and they're going to be gathering pollen, and they'll drink nectar for their own energy. So they'll gather pollen from flowers in our yard. Along the way, they're going to drop some of that pollen and pollinate our squashes. And then they're going to carry that pollen back to the leaf case that they made for their egg. I gotta plug in again, sorry. All right, now I won't bump you around too much. All right, so these bees make their little leaf cases. Inside there, the eggs hatch, the larvae eat this pollen, and then they pupate. And basically their life cycle is that they'll pupate over winter, or they'll overwinter as pupa, and then in the spring they will hatch as adults. They'll find a mate, and the cycle starts again. So these leafcutter bees are most active. We're likely seeing them in the summertime. There's some other solitary native bees called mason bees that are really active in the spring. 80%, I think, about 80% of native bees are actually ground-dwelling bees. And so sometimes you'll see holes in the side of a bank or little chimneys. Those are also native bees. Again, they're solitary bees, and they are putting their young into little tunnels underground, and so they're actually digging. So like digger bees and miner bees, there's a ton of those, and those are also active in earlier springtime. And then in summertime we tend to see the leafcutter bees. So each one kind of has a window. They're all of them are overlapping, and all of them can have a place in your garden. The great thing about these solitary bees is they're generally not aggressive. They don't have a hive full of honey or a hive full of brood to defend. So honeybees and wasps, like yellow jackets, usually they're going to be aggressive because they're defending a nest. In this case, the solitary bees they do have a nest, but they're not going to be aggressive in that same way. So they're great bees to have around. Often you won't even notice them until you start looking for them. And now you will, right? Now you'll start looking for them. And now you'll have to take your camera in the garden, and you're going to take pictures and then come back inside and try to figure out which native bees you have. So these are fantastic bees to have around. What can you do to encourage them? Well, we're going to talk a lot about that in tonight's workshop. So for more ideas, come on back tonight. But planting the plants that they need for their nest, so the leaf cutter material, the material they like, so hostas are great, roses are great. Then they need pollen and nectar plants, and they need that the blooms to continue through the season, right? Because they are working like through their whole adult part of their life. Those females are out cutting leaves, gathering pollen, laying an egg, then they go do it again and again and again, and they'll have like a whole little burrow full of babies encased in their leaf wallpaper. All right, so then we get to have them in our garden, right? So you can think about, as you are planting your pollinator plants, over the last couple of weeks, we've talked a lot about native wildflowers and native trees that you can bring into your garden to support pollinators. But don't forget that our vegetable gardens support pollinators too. They are full of flowers that we want pollinated, right? Squashes, cucumbers, tomatoes. We can let some of our other crops that we grow for other purposes go to seed, because first they'll go to flower, right, to support pollinators. So our brassicas, like when your broccoli and your cauliflower, once you've harvested that main head, you can leave the plants in. They'll form another head of smaller heads, or headlets. That's not the right word. Chris, do you know it? But they'll form smaller ones, and you could let those actually go to flower and to seed. You can let your lettuces, once they bolt, you don't have to rip them out right away. You can leave them there for the pollinators. Your radishes, if you miss some radishes and they get woody, you want to just leave them in the ground, let them bolt, and they'll feed pollinators. So pollinators are both important in our vegetable gardens and then can benefit from our vegetable gardens, especially if you manage your garden in a way that's thinking about, how do I provide that habitat? It might be also with your interplanting of like some herbs and some wildflowers planted into your garden. So more ideas about that tonight. Other crops that are great for both humans and bees are, let's see if I can find the bottoms here. This one is especially benefiting from leafcutter bees. In fact, there's a non-native bee that was introduced that really helped with seed production in this plant. Do you recognize it? Put it in the comments if you do. So this is alfalfa. Did you guess right? So this is two different kinds of alfalfa, but alfalfa is of course a forage for our livestock, right? We have farmers who grow it for hay, and it's a really good protein-rich hay. It's also great as a mulch. Like if you can get organic alfalfa, it's a great mulch in your garden because usually it's harvested before it sets flower and seed when it's harvested for hay. So it's pretty weed-free, or seed-free, excuse me. It's pretty seed-free, alfalfa hay is, and it's really nitrogen-rich. Alfalfa is a legume, so it's a nitrogen-fixing plant. So it's also a great cover crop. It has really deep roots. It's perennial, so you can potentially use it in a system where you're going to chop it down, plant into it, and then kind of mow the alfalfa, and then you might let the alfalfa come back after your crop is done. So it can be a part of a really nice complex system because of its ability to really pull nutrients from deep in the soil. It's really drought resistant. So a useful plant for humans and for leafcutter bees. And that Asian leafcutter bee, when it accidentally came, because as humans we tend to move things around, other living things, we tend to move them around. So this Asian leafcutter bee is a really efficient pollinator of alfalfa. So in the West, they actually, where they're growing lots of alfalfa, they encourage this Asian leafcutter bee because it's such a good pollinator of their plant. And it's become naturalized, like many of the things we as humans move around. And we can have another discussion about that another day, because there's all kinds of things around like non-native species and how they interact in our natural landscapes. But we'll save that conversation for another day. So for today, the thing to remember is bees and all pollinators are so important in our gardens, so important in our ecosystems. They definitely have a place in your vegetable garden and can benefit from your vegetable garden. And so as you're thinking about those pollinators, keep in mind that there are 4,000 native bees that you maybe haven't even ever noticed, and start to look for them, and start to really once you start seeing them, you'll start to think about how can I increase habitat for these beautiful little bees. And I think that's always a good thing to do when we can add habitat to our yards. So thank you so much for watching, and until I see you again, which hopefully is tonight, if you're interested in that pollinator workshop, happy gardening.